2013, a Spanish couple reported to the police that their 12-year-old adopted Chinese daughter had disappeared. Soon after, the police received news that the girl had been found dead in a forest park. Her body showed signs of torture, with a small amount of blood detected in her private area, and a large amount of sleeping pills were found in her system. Just as the police were puzzled about who the murderer could be, several private photos of the girl were discovered on her adopted father's computer. This adoption turned out to have been ill-intentioned from the very beginning. On September 21, 2013, Spanish police received a missing child report. The callers were a divorced couple, Rosario Porto, the mother, Alfonso Pastrana, the father. They told police that their 12-year-old adopted daughter, Assunta Pastrana, had gone missing. According to the account, the night before, at 8 p.m., Assunta had left home to visit a friend, but she never returned. She had not called or contacted them since. At first, police assumed it was a case of a child staying out too late. Perhaps she had gone to a friend's house, gotten distracted, forgotten to inform her parents. After all, if this had been a kidnapping, wouldn't the kidnappers have attacked them by now? But her parents insisted something was wrong. They begged the police to take the case seriously. They reminded officers, even though they were divorced, this child had been a special part of their lives. She was adopted from Guizhou, China, had grown up with them, and meant everything to them. Before the police could even begin their search, a call came in. A man had dialed emergency services. He told them, while out for dinner with a friend near Santiago's Forest Park, they had stumbled upon a body of an Asian girl. Upon receiving the report, the police rushed to the scene, bringing along Rosario Porto and Alfonso Pastrana. As they approached the body, their worst fear were confirmed. The girl was none other than their missing daughter, Assunta Pastrana. Her entire body was bound, her arms twisted, her body was covered in bruises and wounds. Between her legs, a pool of blood. Her body was sent to the forensic lab for examination. Days later, the autopsy report was released. Cause of death: strangulation. She had been choked until she stopped breathing. The bruises are on her body, evidence of a desperate struggle before death. Traces of blood were found in both her private area and her mouth, a crime that no parent should ever have witnessed. In addition to the bruises, wounds, and strangulation marks, the autopsy report uncovered something inside Assunta's stomach. They found 27 undissolved tablets of lorazepam. Lorazepam was a common sedative and a sleeping pill, but this dose, it was 10 times the daily amount prescribed for an adult. For a 12-year-old girl, it was more than enough to render her completely unconscious. The report confirmed that Assunta died around 9 p.m. on September 20. Given a high dose of sedatives, police formulated a preliminary theory. The killer drugged Assunta, forcing her to take a lethal amount of lorazepam. Once she was fully unconscious, they smothered her, blocking her mouth and nose. Death came through forced suffocation, but one detail stood out: where her body was found. It wasn't the murder site. Someone had moved her body to a high-traffic mountain trail, intentionally placing her in an area where she would be quickly discovered. This case has escalated. What started as a missing child case was now a high-profile murder investigation. And the first prime suspects, the very people who had reported her missing, her adopted parents, Rosario Porto and Alfonso Pastrana. From the very moment Rosario Porto and Alfonso Pastrana arrived to identify their daughter's body, something felt off. Their reactions were unnatural. The moment it approached Assunta's body, they burst into loud sobs, wailing in grief, as if they had just collapsed from heartbreak. But there was one problem. Not a single tear fell from their eyes. They hadn't even looked closely at the body. It was too forced, too rehearsal. Even officers who had seen countless grieving parents felt uneasy watching them, even if she was just their adopted daughter. No parent should have been this disconnected from their child's death. And when police dug deeper, they found a trail of unsettling clues. The Porto Pastrana couple had a notable reputation in Spain. They were widely known for being the first Spanish family to adopt a Chinese baby, and appeared on television multiple times, portraying themselves as devoted and loving parents. But once police spoke to their neighbors and close acquaintances, it was nothing like the picture-perfect image they had painted for the public. Neighbors revealed that Assunta's relationship with her adopted parents had always been strained. She was not close to them at all. In contrast, she had a deep bond with her late grandparents. In reality, for most of her life, Assunta had even lived with her adopted parents. She had been raised by her grandparents. It was only after their death that she was forced to return to Rosalio and Alfonso. Police also spoke to Assunta's tutor, who confirmed another detail. Before her death, Assunta's behavior had drastically changed. She seemed disoriented and constantly exhausted. Her adopted parents had been giving her unidentified medication every day. This was deeply concerning. Then, the police made a discovery. Rosalio Porto was depressed. She had been in long-term medical treatment and had official documentation from a psychiatrist, which meant she had easy access to prescription drugs, and one of them, lorazepam. The very same drug found in lethal amounts inside Assunta's body. The forensic report revealed it a discovery. Within the first 1.1 inch of Assunta's hair, traces of lorazepam were found. Since human hair grows at an average rate of 0.4 inches per month, this meant that 3 months before her death, Assunta had already been consuming sleeping pills. This was no accident. It was a long-term plan. And the biggest question remained but obvious. Who was drugging her? There was no way a 12-year-old girl could have bought these sedatives on her own. Even if she truly needed medication for emotional issues, her adopted parents would have been aware, which meant they either gave her the drugs themselves or knew exactly who did. To further investigate, police reviewed their surveillance footage from the family's residential area. They needed to find out what really happened the night Assunta vanished, and then they found something. On the day of Assunta's disappearance, she had been seen leaving with her adopted mother, Rosalio Porto, heading towards Alfonso Pastrana's home. But here is where it got suspicious. When Rosalio left that residence, she was alone. There was no sign of Assunta. So where had Assunta gone? How did she go from her father's house to a remote forest park? It didn't make sense until an officer reviewing the footage noticed something. Assunta had never left the car. The first time investigators reviewed the footage, they missed. Why? Because the back seat had been folded down, concealing her body. With this critical discovery, police began tracking Rosalio Porto and Alfonso Pastrana's activities. The couple has visited hospitals and pharmacies, each time purchasing large quantities of lorazepam. With so many suspicions now aligned, detectives reached a conclusion. Assunta had not been kidnapped. She had been murdered by the very people who had raised her. On September 24, 2013, police officially arrested Rosalio Porto and Alfonso Pastrana. At first, they denied everything, claiming they had nothing to do with Assunta's death. But police had anticipated their lies. Before making the arrest, they had already searched the couple's countryside villa. What they found? A rope identical to the one used to bind Assunta's lifeless body. On Alfonso's computer, a large collection of explicit photos of Assunta. In these disturbing images, 12-year-old Assunta was dressed in fishnet stocking and dance leotards, her legs positioned provocatively as if she was being forced to pose. There was no more room for denial. Confronted with the overwhelming evidence, Rosalio and Alfonso finally confessed. The real motive behind Assunta's murder? Money. Specifically, the inheritance left behind by her late grandmother. Rosalio Porto was born into privilege. She came from one of Spain's elite families. Her father was a renowned university professor and had served as a consul at the French embassy. Her mother was an influential intellectual figure, holding significant social standing in the country. Growing up in such an affluent and highly educated environment, it was expected that Rosalio would be just as exceptional. She excelled academically, ranking among the top students throughout school. By high school, she was admitted to Santiago's University to study law. Later, she was accepted into Oxford University for further studies. After graduating, it didn't take long for Rosalio to establish her own company. With her father's influence, she secured a position as a consul at the French embassy. For years, she was her parents' pride, a brilliant daughter who never gave them a reason to worry. Then came Alfonso Pastrana, tall, charming, and charismatic. He was a television journalist, the kind of man many women admired. Soon after they met, they quickly fell in love. Rosalio's parents were thrilled, believed their daughters had finally found happiness. To celebrate their marriage, they gifted her a luxury villa in an affluent neighborhood. A couple with wealth and status, it was a picture-perfect life that many envied. But it didn't take long for things to unravel. Not long after their marriage, Rosalio changed. She became reckless with money, spending outrageously and living extravagantly. Her parents were furious, but the once obedient daughter now rebelled against him at every turn. Instead of listening, she continued squandering money alongside Alfonso, indulging in a lavish lifestyle. As Rosario reached the age for motherhood, she still had no children of her own, but she saw an opportunity. By adopting a child, she could rebuild her strained relationship with her father and, more importantly, secure financial support from him. Adopting a child in Spain was complicated, so she leveraged her diplomatic connections at the French embassy. Through a colleague's referral, she was introduced to a Chinese orphanage. Rosario and Alfonso traveled to Guizhou, China, where they visited a local welfare home. The moment the orphan children saw them, they shrank away in fear, all except for one little girl. She smiled brightly at them again and again. Rosario and Alfonso made their choice. With all the paperwork finalized, they brought her back to Spain. They named her Assunta Pastrana. At first, everything seemed perfect. Rosario and Alfonso showed her with affection, spoiling her with the best clothes, the best toys, and the best education. But their interest faded quickly. The novelty of parenting wore off, and soon they longed for their carefree, child-free life again. So, they sent Assunta away to Rosalio's parents. For the elderly couple, it was love at first sight. They adored Assunta, treated her as if she was their own flesh and blood. Under their loving guidance, Assunta flourished, was brilliant, curious, and full of life. And despite her troubled origins, she brought genuine joy to her adopted grandparents. But for Rosalio's father, even Assunta's presence wasn't enough to change his opinion. He still saw Rosario for what she was, a selfish, reckless woman. When Assunta was 10, her grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. Despite medical efforts, she didn't survive. Her passing shattered Assunta's grandfather, his stats deteriorating rapidly. Not long after, he too passed away. But before his death, he made one final decision, a decision that would seal Assunta's fate. Knowing that Rosario was reckless with money, she drafted a will with the help of his lawyer. His entire fortune, 2 luxury villas worth 3 million euro, 1 million euro in cash, would not go to Rosario. Instead, he left everything to Assunta. Since Assunta was still a minor, Rosario was assigned as the custodian of the inheritance. At first, she didn't care about the money. Her own income was more than enough. But then, disaster struck again. Her law firm collapsed. She was drowning in debt. With no career and no more financial support from her parents, Rosalio's life crumbled. She spiraled into self-destruction. She and Alfonso fought over money. Eventually, the marriage fell apart. They divorced, and Assunta was placed under Rosalio's custody. With both her career and family in ruins, Rosario was diagnosed with severe depression, relying on heavy medication just to function. Meanwhile, Assunta, still just a child, tried her best to help. She moved to their parents, hoping to bring some stability back into their lives, but she was too young to understand. Their fights weren't just about petty arguments, they were about money. And in desperation, Rosario turned her sights toward the one person standing between her and wealth, Assunta. For the first time since the divorce, she and Alfonso came together again. Not for love, not for family, but for greed. A plan to eliminate Assunta, to claim her inheritance, and to erase her existence, as if she had never been adopted at all. 3 months before the murder, Rosario began tricking Assunta into taking sedatives. At first, she sweet-talked her. Then she made it a routine. By the time September 20, 2013, Assunta no longer questioned it. On that day, Rosario and Alfonso lured Assunta to their countryside villa. They told her it was a weekend getaway. She believed them. She had no reason to doubt her parents. There, they spiked her drinks with an overdose of sedatives. Assunta slowly drifted into unconsciousness. Before carrying out the final act, Alfonso, twisted and depraved, violated Assunta's lifeless body. He documented it all, photographs, evidence of his sick obsession. Then the real horror began. They bound her wrists and ankles with rope, so tight her skin bruised. She was still breathing, still alive. Then they pressed down, hard, cutting off their hair. The little girl struggled. She fought to live. But the drugs were too strong. Her parents were too strong. Until she stopped fighting, moving, and breathing. With their daughter's lifeless body before them, they calmly cleaned up. Alfonso drove to a nearby forest park. She dumped her body by the trail, a place someone would find her quickly, a place where the police would come running, a place where he and Rosario could play the grieving parents. Hours later, they walked into the police station, their faces twisted in false panic. They filed a missing person report, tears without sorrow, voices without fear. everything perfectly staged. They thought they had committed the perfect crime, but justice came for them. By October 2015, a court convicted them both death, but Spain has no death penalty. Instead, they were sentenced to 18 years in prison. No payroll, no reductions. 5 years later, Rosario ended her own life in prison. Her guilt or just cowardice, no one knows. Alfonso, however, remains behind bars, still breathing, still alive. Unlike Consunta, she never had a choice. She never had a chance. She trusted them, she loved them, and in return, they betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. Consunta's story is not just a murder case, it is a warning, a monstrous display of human greed, a testament to how money corrupts. She deserved a future. Instead, she was left in the dirt of a lonely forest. A child forever frozen in time at 12 years old. May she rest in peace. And may the world never let this happen again. This is Charles bringing you crime story analysis. If you like this channel, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification button. Have a case you want me to dig in and share, leave a message on the comment section. And I will see you next time.